You're listening to the Gangland History Podcast, rigorously researched history that brings the American mob to life, one true story at a time. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Gangland History Podcast. We're here with a very unique show today, as I mentioned in the lead up to the episode. This is our first Roundtable episode. Never done one with more than just one other guest before, so this is going to be a little bit of an interesting discussion. But we've got two amazing guests. So we've got Daniel Edward Rosen, contributor from the New York Sun. Daniel's actually the one that pitched the episode to me. And what I will say, Daniel, is I vaguely am familiar with this event that we're about to discuss, but at the same time, I don't think that it's something that's a widely known operation. At least you don't hear it talked about very often at all. And then we also have, so we'll get into that. And then we also have Frank DiMatteo, author and publisher, son of Ricky DiMatteo. And Ricky, for those of you that don't know, was in fact a member of the legendary Gallo crew of the Colombo family in New York. So, Welcome to the show, guys.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Hello.
All right. So let's get into this. So what I'm kind of calling this episode, just to be a little mysterious, is the Apalachin that never was. So at a very high level, Daniel, can you get into what has kind of become known as the Gurney's Inn operation?
Absolutely. And first and foremost, Jacob, thanks for having me. Frank, great to be on here with you.
Thank you.
So, yeah, the Gurney's Inn, the Apalachin that never was, in 1979, the FBI got the tip that there was going to be this high-profile meeting of all the heads of the families, the five families in Gurney's in Montauk. And what was unusual then is that it would be the first time that they had advance notice of a commission meeting. And the Bureau at that point, their organized crime capabilities were a bit lacking. And so they had this renewed push of, all right, well, now to go after the mob, we can't just arrest guys for truck hijackings or just doing card games. We actually have to get substantial evidence that we can use in racketeering cases, and through that is Title III, getting Title III recordings and recording commission meetings. And so here in their earnestness, they thought, we have the chance to record a commission meeting without them knowing, and through that we could compile a whole host of evidence to which we can use against the five families and establish that there is a conspiracy. They got wind that perhaps Santo Trafficante was going to come in from Florida. The few guys were going to be coming in from New England, and they decided let's let's take a chance. Let's do it. They sent out 40 agents, some of them staying at Gurney's Inn, others at nearby motels. They posed as tourists. They had planes flying overhead. They had surveillance guys in surveillance cars on the ready. And for a week, they waited and nothing happened. Now, the kind of cut to the chase, the thought may be so many agents present trying to pose as tourists probably blew their cover, made themselves very obvious. There are some suspicions as to why it didn't happen. And it's sort of, and one of the reasons why it hasn't really been told before is because it didn't actually happen. The agents themselves kind of came out shorthanded. But, and Frank and I had, I had a great conversation with Frank about this story where he gave me some amazing insights, and we'll get into later how I reached out to Frank. But it was one of those things where the Bureau then probably wasn't as wise as it would eventually become in terms of using RICO and going after the families. And I think that the mob, the mob is very smart. They know who's on the level and who isn't, and I'm sure they'd be able to spot a Fed, no matter how well disguised they are, at a location like Gurney's, which is so remote and exposed.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, you mentioned RICO. I think the law was on the books for over a decade by this point, by the point that you get to this investigation. But you also still, until the mid-'70s, had J. Edgar Hoover sitting still as the head of the FBI. And we all know that he was, until Apalachin, and maybe even after that, especially after the Kennedys were killed, he was not inclined to investigate the mafia because the investigations were incredibly difficult with very little reward, especially at that time. So yeah, I can fully see that the FBI wasn't ready to step up to the big leagues, so to speak. And I think they were still learning quite a bit at the time from an investigation standpoint. And I think that that's a great segue to Frank. As somebody that has experienced this firsthand. I read in your book, Growing Up Mafia, about how at different times President Street was pretty much on lockdown from a surveillance standpoint, and you couldn't go anywhere without being surveilled, probably by local law enforcement. But what are your thoughts on the sophistication of the FBI going into the Gurney's operation and what it's like to be tailed, and how the mafia was, especially at that time, very bug and tail conscious?
Well, first with Gurney's Inn, I heard a little about it many years ago. I was good friends with Joe Schapani, and Joe was there all the time. So I heard a little about it, but I never heard a Trafficante supposed to be there or nothing like that. I heard more local guys just going to be there. And I did a little homework, and a good friend of mine, they were together at that time. He has a better memory than me. And he said he thought it was over the Carmine Galenti killing.
Yeah.
That was one of the topics at the time. They were sitting down on that, one of the topics on that. And he refreshed my memory, and he thinks the guys got a wind of it. They said a rat set it up, gave information they were going there. Yeah, I don't think it was that the information he gave was that strong, or he knew what he was talking about as far as what they were doing, who was going to be there. But he brought to my attention that he says, "Don't you remember?" And I said, "No, I don't remember a lot of things." But he says, we had a guy, I didn't have a guy, but we had a guy, someone around us had a guy with the feds. And he says that he thinks it was Scapa who got wind to everybody, to Carmine Persico.
Interesting.
How he did it without giving nothing up. But everybody says they got somebody that has somebody that has somebody. And that's why no one showed up. because I think they just got wind of something was going down, and that's what I think it was, and that's what they're refreshing my memory on, because I was there. I think a week, that week of that month, we were there at Gurney's. So Joe Chapin, my father, all those guys were all there. But it was common for those guys to be there. Everybody went there. All the Colombo guys, Gambino guys, they all loved going to Gurney's. So it wasn't uncommon to a lot of guys to bunk in each other from different crews and different families. So that's not uncommon for that to happen. The
And
law was good
when they
then.
were
Well, yeah.
when they were there, was it purely recreational, or was it known that meetings would happen there from time to time?
Listen, we have meetings and we're going to take a piss.
Okay.
You got something to say. You got to say something. Sometimes you have to go, for dinner, run into each other, and then something comes up. So you'll be able to speak to each other. It's not like, we got 9 to 5 jobs and we'll make a meeting with, somebody and we'll go sit down and talk. It don't work that way. Sometimes you got to run into each other. Sometimes, it's the oddest places that you need to speak to each other. When you went to Gurney's, it was mostly relaxation. A lot of guys took their wives. But knowing that other guys are going to be there, you're going to run into someone and you bring up the situation, whatever it might be. And it was always situations, especially in the 70s. There was always something going on. But as far down President Street, we had a lot of trouble on President Street since when I was a young guy. We went through that. We went for the Joey Gallo killing and Joe Colombo getting shot. So and we had the police, detectives, the pizza squad stationed on President Street. So we can never go nowhere. To go anywhere, it was really, really hard. And because we had to get out off the block to do things, and you really had to be good. We had to sneak through backyards and over buildings and rooftops just to get out off the block. The law, listen, the law is smart as those days as smart as people tell them, whisper in their ears. Otherwise, they don't know what I'm doing. Or you're doing. They need help, like anything else. Now with the technology, it's a whole different world. What we're talking about then, I don't think they were that good then, but I know they weren't that good then because we wouldn't have got away with anything. But it was a rough time, being just around Joey for those, that year. It was experiencing enough, So, and then, like I said, going to Gurney's, back to Gurney's. Joe Shep, if I'm mistaken, Joe Shapani had a piece of that. A lot of guys had a piece of that because it was a big operation. It wasn't just no small thing. So a lot of guys that were involved had their hand in, helping. Nick was well liked by everybody. So if he was short here, short there, you would get a piece if you needed 50,000, 100,000. He was good for it. So a lot of guys got their hands in there, until they got paid back, and then if they got an envelope, they didn't. But they were so close, those people, they would lend money until they got their money back and then back off the place, So, not that it was a hoodlum place, Nick did a good job with that place.
And who is the Nick that you're referencing?
Nick Monty, that's the owner.
Nick Monty. Okay. I figured as much, but I just wanted to be sure.
And Nick Monty's from Carroll Street. He had the restaurant called Monty's on Carroll Street. That's where he started from. And he branched out from there to Montauk, to Gurney's.
That would make sense because the whole backstory, sort of like local lore, that Nick Monty he had the restaurant Monty's Venetian,
right?
And he was invited out to Montauk by a customer who said, "Hey, you make great linguine and clam sauce. I can make you an even better one using the clams in Montauk." And so Nick took his wife out to Montauk. They drove. They're waiting in this guy's living room drinking. And the guy's like, "Guess what? I forgot to bring food. So if you want to get something to eat, go to Monty's." Sorry, not Monty's, go to Gurney's. And Gurney's back then, it was owned by a Christian scientist named Maud Gurney, and she and her husband opened the place in the 1920s. and they didn't allow drinking. They didn't allow, they only allowed people of certain faith. I'll leave it at that. It
Really?
was somewhat limited in terms of who can get in. But it was known for having incredible food, and incredible view. And so Nick and his wife, they go. He sits down, he orders a drink, and they said that we don't serve alcohol. And so he gave the woman he gave Maud his card. Said, if you ever think about selling, just let me know. And so she sort of laughed it off. But soon enough, he got a call from her and basically said, how serious are you? And so he had raised, I think, about $200,000 at the time, and this is in the mid '50s. So, which by now is probably in the millions when you adjust it. And so that's where what Frank says, that definitely makes a lot of sense to just get that capital instantly. And you look.
Yeah, it was easy for him to get that. Don't forget his whole. He got uncles and nephews all in that Colombo family, so they had a lot of backing.
And like I don't see anything. I don't viewing as a puritanical how dare they type of way. It makes perfect sense because if what Nick had seen was this could be a huge resort. Right now it's just owned by these people who don't have booze. And I'm sure you had seen, imagine you put booze in this place. You imagine if you get more people at this place, you imagine if you keep it year round. And that's what he saw. And so in many ways, he was sort of like a man.
Nick was smart. He knew business-wise, restaurant, bar business. That's what he did. I mean, this guy was good. He didn't stumble on it by accident. He was a smart guy. Very well liked, too.
Absolutely. And you look at in terms of Brooklyn restaurateurs and Montauk, not just Montauk, but Long Island guys who had an outsized influence and impact on the territory. Nick Monty is up there with being probably one of the all-time greats because he had put Montauk on the map with Gurney's.
Sure.
Monty's Venetian was, I guess you'd be able to speak to it. It was one of the longest. It stayed open day in, day out for years, 20 some odd years, maybe forever.
Decades. It was there. It was there forever. It was there forever. After he left, his nephews took it over. They tried to keep it open for years. I think it just closed. Another friend took it over until maybe about 2 years ago, and now they all gone. Now it's turned into a French restaurant because the whole neighborhood changed down there. So I just turned into a French restaurant now. So. But it was there many years. I was a little kid. I went there as a little kid. So, everybody, especially from that neighborhood, if you're from Red Hook or that area, that's it's the place to go.
It's an institution. It sounds like.
Yeah, it was. It was one of the better places to go to. Everybody hung out there, and then you got family connections. So that was a big Colombo hotspot. So those 2 blocks between Nevins and 3rd on Columbia and President. That was their meat. So he was right in the belly of the beast.
Mm-hmm. So going back to the FBI component of this, well, Frank, it doesn't surprise me. Well, it did surprise me to hear you. It doesn't surprise me to hear that you mentioned Greg Scarpa, right? Because I think history will show that, well, he informed. He was a confidential informant for many years. But I think history will also show that he played both sides of the fence for many years as well, to his own benefit, to keep himself active. So it doesn't surprise me that maybe he tipped off the Colombo guys. But at the same time, also he was at times working with the FBI and informing to them. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. So I was surprised to hear that name. But Daniel, the informant's name in this case was Bob, right? So where did Bob come from?
Well, Bob was ugly. If you know who Bob was, I'm all ears.
Right.
Excuse me. So
there was no Bob.
No, Dennis. It was funny. Back in that day of the FBI, if informants were basically handed from one agent to the next. So guys like Lou Chalero would eventually work the Pizza Connection case. he had one of the few top echelon informants, and those are guys who are like a Scarpa.
Yeah, not Bob, and I said the Bob facetiously.
Again, yeah.
Right.
But he, he had Bob was this guy who was high ranking in the Genovese family. He worked in, he worked in, I guess he had some involvement in horse gambling and the aqueduct, and I think he sold steroids to horses, or at least trafficked in that to help his horses win. But he was a guy who was older. He basically by then probably was in his late 60s and 70s. And so he wasn't really attuned to the younger generation of mobsters, guys who are like Frank, who are up and coming. But he knew Paul Castellano because they were both old school. They they related in a way that made Paul trust him a lot more than say a younger guy. And so Bob would give he would give money to Paul whenever they would get their routine coffees at some coffee shop or a diner or a restaurant. And it was sort of like, two old guys shooting the breeze. And so Dennis Buckley, who's young, he's by then a fairly young agent. He had been working the Lufthansa heist investigation along with a bunch of other agents at the time. He had Bob was one of the very few TEs, and so for Dennis, having worked Lufthansa and then prior to that having been on the scene after the Carmine Galante killing, he certainly had good experience in organized crime. And so for him, he had felt that what this guy was telling him was in many ways legit. Because again, he was one of the very few guys who had access to Paul Castellano. Now there is a danger when you have a guy who's that high up, because really, as many FBI agents would soon learn afterwards, is that the guys who really want as informants are the guys who are the uppercomers, like Frank or like someone else, because those are the guys who are hijacking trucks, and then the guys who are hijacking trucks over time would raise the ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would, eventually they would become like your John Gotti or someone else who would take over positions of power. Whereas guys like Bob who are on their way out, and Castellano would, live for much longer after that. And so they were able to verify the informant's source back then with two other guys, one in New Jersey and another based in New York. And so, again, they had a smaller network of informants, and you couple that with their earnestness of being like, we have to make a splash, we have to get a recording,
Mm-hmm.
not doubt this. Like, I think for them it was 1, 2, 3 trend. Let's happen. So.
Let's assemble the plane while it's falling. So to speak.
So the feds had no idea why this didn't happen. They set it all up. They had Bob. Bob's a rat. Why didn't he come back and tell them why it didn't happen?
He kept on saying that. He was talking to Paul. He was talking to Paul repeatedly.
Right.
And Paul saying, "Don't worry, it's going to happen. It's going to happen."
Okay.
And then they never got a firm explanation. Now, I think Bob later on would still prove to be an effective informant, but
I just find it funny that I question everything. If you're going to be a informant, you're going to you get that much information that's going to be set up, and they don't go, and you're still with the guy that's telling you, Paul Castellano. Don't you find out it don't happen? Why it don't happen? That's what I would ask. It was me, and I know I was going to a meeting, and all of a sudden I ain't going to a meeting no more. I'm gonna go find out why.
Let me ask this: if you're the informant and you tipped off the FBI and then it doesn't happen, wouldn't you be looking over your shoulder a little bit?
No, because if what do you call it? If they knew it was him that tipped it off at all, Paulie wouldn't sit down with him again. And maybe that's what happened. I don't know what happened. But if he's that close to Paulie, don't forget, there's not too many people sitting with Paul. It's not like
right.
we'll sit with Paul. So this guy's got to be pretty close to sit with Paul. I just find it funny. I'm not saying he didn't get the information, but I just find that even myself, I would indirectly find out if Paulie got heads up that it's a sting or something like that. You would know. If you got a guy in there, put it this way: if I got a guy in the precinct, and he calls me up and tells me, Frankie, I saw the paperwork. They're coming down the President Street. They're arresting you guys, even if it's for garbage. And he calls me, right, because he's there. And no one shows up. We all went off the block like a bunch of little school kids. And we all went off the block. And then no one comes down. I'm going to grab him and say, oh, what happened, right? So I'm just that way, even if it's indirectly, you don't have to be like you're axing and pushing. But if that guy was close enough that Paulie to tell him that deep, who's going, where they're coming from, and all that stuff. So this guy's pretty close. He's not like a schmuck like me or somebody like that. This guy would be pretty close. You know what I mean? So that's why it's got loose ends. If you look at the loose ends, that's the loose ends. And then even at the Fed's fault. I'm saying on the informant's fault and the criminal's fault. Some went down over there. That we don't know if we're not privy to it. But it's not that they saw them. They saw the helicopters at Gurney's and stuff like that. No, because we would have known that it would got picked up, and then they would have picked up that somebody was there. No one was there. So it's just that if the guy was right, if the informant, somebody around it got word that something was going down, and that's why it didn't go down.
Sorry, go ahead, Jacob.
I was just going to say, so the interesting thing is a couple of years down the line, as you get into the 80s, the FBI eventually does catch a commission meeting where they do photograph the, Castellano, I think maybe Salerno, and a couple of other guys coming out of that meeting a couple of years later. So seems like at some point they learned their lesson, but in this case it was a swing and a miss.
The surveillance was a lot stronger as we go along, with the law.
Yeah,
and then John made that mistake in having everybody come down to the club every Thursday. I mean, it was just like, take my picture, and no one liked it. And you just fed them more information. You just fed them more pictures. And you fed them more what everybody's doing, and they got smarter and smarter, and the technology got smart, man. So by '86 they had I think they had the Windows case already, right? By Windows case by '86, they were bugging Tony, right? They were bugging Tony Solano's car, or what's it, or Tony Dux's car. Yeah, they were all over the place by then. So within those 5 years, they were real quiet and did what they had to do after that 79 problem.
So back in '79, Daniel, and maybe this is what you were going to say. Well, we know the end of the story. The FBI swung and they missed, but they got what they felt like was a valid tip, and they went through the process of galvanizing all of the people to come to bear on Gurney's, which means wiring it up, getting a bug in there, having the planes circle overhead, having the agents infiltrate both inside and outside. And with a place this visible, with this many guys around, how challenging would that have been to do what they did? Because I do find it interesting and even amazing that they were able to get in there and even get set up in the first place in some place like this that was such a hot spot.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. You look at the guys who were there, and there's guys who go on to make these huge cases, where Ed McDonald, who prosecuted Henry Hill after Boston College, he was there. He was the one who was on hand to supervise the Title III authorization. You had Lou Scalero, as I had mentioned, eventually worked Pizza Connection case and became the director of the FBI's office in New York City. You had Steve Carbone, who oversaw Boston College, and then Lufthansa. You had George Hanna, who's considered one of the all-time great agents in handling FBI informants and working organized crime cases. Ed Guevara, who basically handled Henry Hill and helped flip him during Boston College. And so it really was like maybe, and I think a lot of them are loath to say, oh, this was like a practice run. They don't want, I don't think they look at it that way, but it's sort of like how the FBI right now is taking heat for a variety of reasons, more political than anything. But, the FBI, like their whole purpose is to investigate leads. And so if they have a strong enough lead and they compile enough evidence, then they hand it over to the Justice Department or to the U.S. Attorney, and they're able to make a case, then they've done their job well. They don't get the evidence, then there's no case. And so, for them, it would be like, we can't just necessarily stand back and say, I don't know, it sounds too good to be true. They're like, all right, let's do it. Let's try it. And so, and you can't really fault them for that. And I do think, you look at what happened shortly thereafter with Boston College, Mob Commission, Pizza Connection, Gotti, and a whole host of other cases. Like, they may have lost that first game, but eventually they do get a few wins down the road.
Blame Bob.
What's up?
Yeah,
Blame Bob.
Yeah, they lost the battle.
Yeah,
they lost the battle, but they won the war.
Those guys are as good as the information they got. They're gonna follow up on it. But if the information is no good, you start off the wrong foot in the first place.
So it's a completely unverified theory. I kind of was thinking maybe, well, what is it? Is it, what's the word? Is it like maybe it was sort of their sneaky way of getting business over to Gurney's during the tail end of the of the postseason when the summer season's over and you have that lull in business. Was it the fact that Nick Monte and Angelo, I think it was his brother, who was the co-owner, the co-operator, was he? Did they see the bureau there and say, guys, you don't want to do it here? Because like Nick and Frank can make this point. He wasn't in the mob. Like he was, if anything, Nick resented. And there's some great articles about Nick at that time because Gurney's had just opened up this spa. They spent like $4 million. It would eventually be the financial undoing, and they would have to convert to timeshares. And then eventually they sold it for a ton of money. So they made out okay. Mm-hmm. But Nick really hated the associations, the automatic association between him and organized crime, because they thought, well, I'm an Italian guy from Brooklyn. I'm in Montauk. I must be affiliated with the mob. Now, at the end of the day, and Frank spoke about this, like if you operate in that territory being in Carroll Gardens or Red Hook, you have a Brooklyn restaurant that's very popular, with, in their case, celebrities, organized crime guys, politicians. At some point you're going to get someone who's going to be interested in selling you protection or selling you some type of, tithe. And so I don't.
He always had a rabbi. He's got family. He has family that's involved. Not that himself, but you make a money, and that's your place. This guy's always hang out there. And then it's good to have a rabbi. Put it that way, and he had a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to have a protector for sure.
Yeah,
and you almost had to. There was probably no other way to operate.
I don't think it had to be protected from anything. I think it's more of a financial thing than a protection, because no one's going down there to Cower Street and bothering Nick Montauk. I mean, it just don't happen. I mean, you got 92 Colombo killers over there hanging in that place. Who's going to go over there and bother? I think it's more of a financial thing, you know, more like that, more than, you needed muscle and stuff like that. And then, forget you in a place like that. There's always arguments, there's confrontations, things happen, and you got to turn a cheek and stuff like that. But Nick didn't need to be involved. He was well liked, but I say more of a financial thing, to with his rabbis. Because I know Joe Shep was close with with Nick, and it was it was definitely a money thing. So when Joe Shapani, got involved with him, it was strictly money. So, and it wasn't no one was moving in on him. It was they're both older guys, and they needed. Joe Ship had a lot of money, close with Nick Monty. They probably needed it for Gurney's, and that's how. And Joe said, "Okay, what do you need? 50,000, whatever it is. Okay, I'll give it to you. Give me a piece. If you want to pay me back, give you a piece back. Because Shep didn't need it at the time. Excuse me, he didn't need it at the time, so it was more of a friendly thing, but it was a money thing all the time."
So what do you all feel like is the legacy of this failed operation, right? How did this play forward to help modernize or help the FBI improve the way that they went about these types of surreptitious investigations?
It's a good question.
That's yours. That's yours, Dan. It's not mine. That's yours.
Well, no, I think Frank said to me best. Frank said RICO is a bitch. I think again they realized, if you really want to get these guys, you got to go through RICO, and you got to, there's sort of this other philosophy, and I got to attribute this to Steve Carbone, which is this idea of follow the bouncing ball, because you have to get one tip. So all it takes is like a tip. You get one guy, you develop the guy, you get more information, and then you follow. Maybe one guy makes another introduction, or like you get, my allergies are acting up too, Frank.
Yeah, bad. That's what it is.
They're killing me. But no, but like it basically ultimately it's like, listen, like you can't discredit any piece of information you get. And in a city like New York, where everything is very interconnected, where, the mob has its hand in everything, and where it gets problematic is when people are getting shaken down. People can't open up a business without having to pay this ridiculous tax. And so if you're able to prove a conspiracy through racketeering, then effectively that's how you dismantle the administration and the foundation of organized crime. And I think that's what they realize. All right, first you get the what is it? It's like first you get the informant, then you get the recordings, and then you get the family. This is what it feels like. But I think it did certainly give them this roadmap of how you could effectively go.
Well, RICO was when they learned RICO. Whoever put that together, when they learned that was the beginning of the end. I think it took 9 years. I think Funzi was the first guy convicted, Frank Tieri, on the RICO.
Yeah,
Funzi.
Yeah, Tieri.
Yeah, Funzi. And it took 9 years to do that. You know what I mean? So, but after that, it was all downhill. After that, the law got smart. Man, listen, when you can make laws to screw somebody, and you can make them, man, you're in trouble. Everybody else is in trouble. I always say that there, but and that's what they did. That RICO Act is a killer. You do when everybody was cocky about doing a year or two on and laugh about, now you're doing 5 to 10 and It changes people's it changes their attitude towards things, and people give up fast. That's why in the 80s that's when the rats started coming out. when I was a young guy, you couldn't even say the word rat. You were in trouble because it just wasn't there wasn't nobody around like that, and then it just busted out because nobody wanted to do time no more. Everybody wants to do the crime, but nobody wants to do the time, And,
So it was federal bail.
yeah, and that's what happened. They were given 10, 15, 20 years to the shit that we were laughing at one time, Rico's a killer, as bright as the law is and as good as the FBI is, but they needed that law. Without that Rico, they can do all the surveillance they want, and if you can't link it all together, that was a law, So
Yeah.
I think whoever wrote RICO that's who they got to give the credit to. That's what I say.
And that is G. Robert Blakey,
Yeah.
who was the originator, and he was, I believe, he had served as an assistant under Bobby Kennedy, who is, of course, was very much hated by the mob,
And by Hoover.
And by Hoover as well. A lot of people. He had a lot of enemies. Did an episode on that about all the Kennedys, many enemies. Do you guys, what's your feelings on RICO? To me, RICO was legitimately the only way to take down, in my opinion, the mob, because the mob by that point, 50s, 60s, had infiltrated almost every facet of legitimate society through either directly or through unions and things indirectly. And the bosses by that time were not getting their hands dirty. So there really wasn't an easy way to walk it up the chain to get to them, but they're ultimately who the RICO law is designed to take down. It's the kingpin, the boss law, right? And but my question is, seeing how it was used and seeing how it's used today, do you think it's constitutional? A lot of people don't even think it's constitutional, even though it is a pretty effective law.
I think
it's constitutional. I mean, if you read, I'm off right now. If you read what makes it RICO, put together 4 or 5 facts. If you do these 4 or 5 things, it constitutes, an organization. Yeah. It's a no-brainer. I mean, do we like it? And of course, the bad guy's not going to like it, but doesn't mean that it's not right. You know what I mean? They did their homework. It's a great law. It's a great law to keep everything good. RICO's, in my opinion, is what made them. It really is. That's that's really my opinion.
Yeah. I did not expect you to say that. I expected you to be on the other side. To be honest, yeah.
No. Which side is right, wrong. But like I said, listen, Giuliani put me out of business in 2003. I've been saying since 2003, that's what this guy's supposed to do. How am I going to be mad at this guy? You know what I mean? He's not a whole. That was his job. You can't be mad at people do their jobs. You know what I mean? Do I like it? No. Do I curse him? Yeah, but I curse everybody. You know what I mean? But do you dislike Giuliani? No. Guy did his job. Because you're doing one thing and he's doing the other. Nah. You gotta be realistic. Guys good at what they do, and he did it. He won. We lost. That's what happens. You win and lose in this game. It's a game, and you win and lose. And I just think it's a good. It's a good law.
And if you go to other places, Italy, Canada, it's still the Wild West there, primarily because, especially Canada, it's still every bit of what New York was in the 60s or 70s. They're still murdering people up there on a regular basis, whereas that's been to some degree off the table for a couple of decades here in the United States, primarily because they don't have a RICO law up there. And people who do get caught and do get sentenced in Canada are out a lot more quickly. There aren't life sentences being tossed around. So it is a particularly effective law, and I'm surprised that other governments have not taken the example and implemented it. So, very, very interesting.
Especially Canada. especially Canada, because a lot of bad stuff happens in Canada. We had many connections in Canada many years ago.
Yep.
So yeah, Canada was a great place. It was a great place to hide. You can go hide there. At one
Yeah.
point. I mean, so who knows? Maybe eventually you get the right administration and they get smart, or maybe they don't wanna. Maybe they like it the way it is.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's so much graft there. We don't know how their system works, man. We know our system's broke. They could be even broke worse, So
Yeah.
you don't know. I mean, 'cause they're not stupid people. I don't find people to be stupid at all. It's
Nope.
just what the agenda is and what you want to do. If you want to correct something, if you don't want to correct something, but they're not doing it out of stupidity. So there's always a reason behind something.
So, Daniel, what became of the agents that did this, that took part in this Gurney's Inn operation?
So Dennis Buckley would go on. I think he supervised a drug squad, but he had a great, a very very successful career in the bureau that would last for many years. Guevara, as I mentioned, he had worked Henry Hill and Boston College.
Yep.
And then he did a lot of undercover work as well. And then eventually he would become the special agent in charge. I think it was in El Paso for a number of years, and now he's in the private sector. And McDonald, obviously, he was an Eastern District legend.
You saw him in Goodfellas 10 years later.
Forever.
Yeah.
Forever. His legacy is cemented. Steve Carbone, he would stay in the Brooklyn Queens MRA, which is where all these agents were based out of. He would be there for the remainder of his career and he supervised a lot of huge cases like Operation Petrified Forest, the Cavalcanti family. He worked alongside George Hanna, who was involved in that too. You had, there's a few others. I think the most interesting one is this guy Ed Tickle, who was basically their black bag guy, their black bag specialist. But he would be fired from the bureau and would do time about 2 years later because he had transported stolen diamonds across state lines, and then also had given Richard Petty, the NASCAR driver, the stock car driver.
Yeah, the driver.
He had given Richard Petty's race team a bunch of FBI radios, which were these kind of like state-of-the-art two-way radios that obviously they were more than happy to take, but technically he was not allowed to do that. So he was an incredible black.
That's pretty random.
It was really random, but he was an incredible black bag artist, but was a bit shifty. But and then Margot Dennedy, who was on the scene, I didn't really share much of her story in that, but she would become the first ever female supervisor, and she worked Abscam, which to go back to your RICO question, it seemed like Abscam, certainly got a bigger, was certainly more cause for concern by the U.S. government than say RICO, because they felt that was sort of forced. They forced these the politicians from New Jersey into wherever it was into. They kind of entrapped them. I'll leave it at that, into the situation, and got evidence that way. But I think for the most part, these agents, no one was fired because of it, and no one was. I don't think Bob was killed. Bob was still very active, and I think Bob actually may have been involved in the murder case that basically severed his employment with the FBI. To end it, these guys, no one got fired, and no one got, to my understanding, no one got killed over this. If anything, Monty's left with a ton of money. So I think at the end of the day, I think it was sort of a disappointing outcome for the FBI, but certainly, all things considered, it didn't result in anything catastrophic. I'll leave it at that.
No, they probably just learned. They probably learned from it not to listen to Bob.
Yeah, don't listen to Bob.
Don't listen to Bob.
Don't listen to Bob.
Don't listen to Bob.
All right.
Hey guys, this is fun.
Well, given that I'm having a little bit of a rough connection here, why don't we go ahead and close down the episode, guys? Thank you so much for joining. Great episode as always, and yeah, looking forward to the next one. Any closing comments besides don't listen to Bob?
No,
it was enjoyable, guys.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and sign off, and I'll say just until next time. May your troubles be light and your envelopes heavy. Have a good one, everybody.
All right, great to meet you guys. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.